George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation. Let me stop this for a minute. George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We got a superstar up in here, Dr. Frederick Haynes III, one of the keynote speakers for the Dream Summit. You know the date, August 27th and 28th at the On Center, and mydreamsummit.com for more information. Dr. Haynes is the senior pastor of the Friendship West Fellowship Church in Big D, Dallas, Texas. And we're so glad that he's joining us. The Friendship West is doing some great things in the Dallas community, especially as it relates to all kinds of things, including economic development. So in order for this interview to be what it's going to be, we had to bring in a money lady, America's money maven, Vicki Bracken's in the house to join us for this conversation as well. Vicki, where you been? Good to see you.
Well, George, it's nice to see you again, too. I know that I've been out on vacation, a very extended vacation, most of the summer. But when I heard that Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes, is going to be one of the keynote speakers for the Dream Summit, I wanted to make sure that, first of all, I said hello to him, being a native of Dallas, Texas, myself, graduate of South Oak Cliff High School. Okay, back in the great year. Back in the great year of 1972, and I can say 72 now, Dr. Haynes, because of the fact that we finally rectified that problem out in Odessa and made sure that we got that state championship.
Got that state championship. You better say it.
That's right. Okay, state championship. So I want to be sure and say thank you, first of all, to you, though, more so on a serious matter, for keeping the Zoom room going. During the time of COVID, my mother and I, mom moved from Dallas to Syracuse about 19 years ago. And during the time of COVID, because of the fact that she was in assisted living and we weren't able to be together, we would watch you, which connected her back to Dallas through the Zoom room with a TV, with her small cell phone, and looking at my monitor every Sunday morning for several weeks. Unfortunately, both George and I lost our mothers during COVID, but that was such a wonderful time for us to fellowship with you and your congregation. But here's my first question I really want to ask you. During that time, there was a lot of pressure on you to actually make a decision to keep your congregation virtual while everybody in Dallas was forcing and saying that on a political basis and a social basis that you were doing the wrong thing. Where did that fortitude come from, and how did you stand so strong?
Wow, thank you so much for that. And God bless you and George in terms of my condolences for such significant losses and such amazing gifts. And so my prayers are with you. And I thank you so much for all that you so graciously and generously shared. That was, when I tell you that the whole piece around COVID has been overwhelmingly challenging. But for me, as I've shared with our church and even with my colleagues, if we call ourselves quote unquote shepherds, shepherds have a responsibility not only to feed the flock, but to protect the flock. And I won't forget my grandfather, when he was pastor of Third Baptist in San Francisco, he was the first African-American to run for county supervisor in the city and county of San Francisco. And so this person with a neck problem was real red, confronted one of the deacons of the church and said, why would your pastor do that? Doesn't he know the role of the shepherd is to feed the sheep? And so the deacon clapped back, our shepherd feeds the sheep and fights the wolves. And so having that kind of consciousness for me said, I cannot just content myself to feed the sheep, to get them to the sanctuary. I have a big responsibility more than that, to protect them. And so for me, it became of the utmost importance to ensure that the people were protected. That being my, prime priority, to put it like that. I could not make any other choice but to say, okay, God, if this thing is going to work, this is your church. I'm not gonna lie, I was afraid because
Sure.
I mean the presence of the people ensures that the work of the church goes
Right.
on.
Yeah.
Because I mean we have a huge budget, and the budget has everything to do with the outreach we do, the social justice activism we're engaged in. I mean, we feed the homeless and minister to the homeless year round. We don't wait till Christmas and Thanksgiving. It's a year-round piece. And so that could not go on if the people weren't giving. And of course, I was concerned that the people don't show up in church, they won't give. But I believe God honored my commitment to protect the people. And as a consequence, our ministry, it expanded during
Right.
COVID.
Mhm.
In ways that continue to blow my mind. And there were so many who not only respected what we were doing, but they said, okay, we want to help ensure that you keep doing what you're doing. And we've given more scholarship award money in the last 3 years than we have prior. We're serving, sadly, more persons who are houseless than we've been prior to COVID. And I think that has everything to do with the fact that we tried to do the right thing. And as y'all know, I'm in Texas, and I add the S intentionally.
Talk to me.
And we have a governor who is downright evil.
Yeah.
And they just don't care about people. And I don't think that you can be involved in this human race, number one, but then number two, call yourself connected to God and involved in ministry without caring about people. And so I'm just convinced that that was honored. I'm grateful. We continue to do the work that we're doing. And but for me, it was, okay, let's look out for the people. And I'm really proud to say, I think we looked out for the people.
You did.
And the people in turn have looked out for the church.
Absolutely.
Vicky, but let me just follow up on that,
Yeah.
because with Greg Abbott being what he is to the state of Texas and what he's doing now, what pressure does that put on the church to meet the needs of the people?
Right. Well, for me, and I'll just put it to you like this, it's pressure that pushes us into doing what we should be doing if Abbott ain't being a butt.
Okay.
And so it's just so important that the church understands. I mean, the Black church, let's be real, the Black church was born fighting for freedom. The Black church was born. Henry Mitchell, in his book, Black Church Beginnings, says the birth of the Black church in the context of enslavement, every Black preacher used her or his platform, used her or his pulpit as a platform for abolition, meaning whatever was going on outside of the church, it was addressed by the preacher, the pastor, and those who were engaged in ministry in the church. And somehow we got away from that, and we forgotten that our identity is connected to, I mean, if you're fighting abolition, that means you're fighting a system. And so for me, it's very important that we recognize our church was born fighting a system of injustice. It's in our DNA. We've got to always fight injustice and fight for justice. And when you look at what enslavement did, not only dehumanizing us, and we look at white supremacy, but also the church at the same time became that vehicle for what? Economic empowerment. That vehicle. I mean, the first insurance companies, when we could not get insurance at New York Life, we formed our own through the church. And so I'm just thinking, if we handle this thing right as a Black church, we'll allow ourselves to get pushed back into doing what we were born doing and what we should always be doing. So even though Abbott is a butt, at the same time, he's pushing us into doing what we should be doing. And I'll give one more example. They have this stupid mess in Texas where they're doing all they can to miseducate our children.
Yes, right.
Well, Black folk can't rely on other people to educate our kids. We need to educate our kids. And who has the most property, real estate, where we can transform our real estate property into educational facilities? The church. And we can say, okay, CRT, they're anti-CRT. We live CRT every single day in this country.
Let's go.
They're anti-woke, anti-Black. So what do? We need to teach it ourselves. and not depend on Pharaoh to educate our children.
Let's go. Let's go. By the way, we're talking with Dr. Frederick Haynes III, senior pastor of the Friendship West Baptist Church out of Big D, Dallas, Texas. Go ahead, Vicki.
So dovetailing into that, the epicenter of what I would call possibly being a purple state, based on what's happening in Houston and all of your educational centers there. With that being the possibility, and what's happening with the governor, how are you preparing just in case Trumpism takes over Texas again? And what would you admonish the rest of us around the country as far as the economic issues? As you saw, I own a financial planning firm here, and we have these conversations all the time. But what are you saying to really get people focused on the fact that if this happens, what the preparation needs to be to gird themselves up for economically and socially and spiritually to fight the next war? Because I wish I could say it can't happen, but it happened once before, so I can't ignore it.
Yeah. And I thank you for having the courage to be honest. What was it, a week ago, that one of the trending topics was civil war. So when you say that it's a possibility, it's real. And there is a viciousness that, the twice impeached, vanquished ex-president has unleashed in this country. And they're emboldened now. And so my thing is, how are we going to, be doormats when they are emboldened? We need to be emboldened right now. And so for me, I think it involves, Sister Vic, it involves having both a long game and a short game. Short game, which recognizes we are in a state of emergency right now, and there are things we must do right now. Every day, we find ourselves in a fight, reacting to, the kind of nonsense that is going on in my state, in Austin. And so you have to have a short game where you are readily reacting to what is going on. By example, for us in Texas, we had our primary in March, and we had, some 13,000 persons whose votes were disqualified because of the new
ID requirements
bills that became, but I'm talking about persons who, not just the ID requirements, George, but I'm talking about also those who had a history of mailing their ballots in. 13,000 were rejected in the state of Texas. And so by way of a short-term piece, we've got to educate. And so what our church is doing, and I'm coalescing with colleagues around the state, and that is, we've got to educate our people about what it means to get your ballot in. And if you can't get your ballot in, we will provide a way for you to have a ride to get to the poll. We're going to do all we can to remove any excuse. And this is what I call the short game, addressing an immediate emergency need. That's the short game. That's one part of the short game. But also with the long game, and I'm so glad to see financial planner right behind you, Vicki, because that's exactly what we're going to have to raise our financial IQ. And better than that, our economic IQ. And
Vicki been talking about that. Yes. And Doc, before you continue, just your fingers blocking your face. We want to see. Yeah, we go. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, George.
Go ahead. Continue.
Sorry about that. I apologize. So for me, it's so important. We have at our church what we call the finance and investment ministry, where it's basically an educational process, a school of finance, where you learn how to handle your money. And this happened, oh my God, over a decade ago, where I looked up and our community was being inundated with payday loan and car title loan stores.
Sure.
And our people, of course, because we are underbanked, we were going to these payday and car title loan stores and, getting ripped off legally. And in Texas, you have more payday and car title loan stores than you do Burger King, McDonald's, and Dairy Queen combined. And so they target our community. And when they target our community, our people end up, getting caught up in this debt cycle. And so that let me know, okay, we're going to have to do something, number one, to provide an alternative. And then number two, we're going to have to do all we can to educate our people about financial literacy, raise our financial and economic IQ. And so that's been our challenge to do that. And that's one of the things that we did when we opened up our credit union. We now have what we call Liberty loans, which is a small dollar loan that you can get with interest rates that are respectable and righteous. And so that's one piece we've done. The other piece, again, to get these small dollar loans, you have to go through our finance and investment classes. And so the idea is that we've got to raise the financial economic IQ of our community. And then for me, the long game, and I get this from Claude Anderson in his book, Powernomics. He talks about the importance of building communities. We have Black neighborhoods, but we don't have a Black community. And the community is what you control economically. And so one of the beautiful things I'm so excited about that we were able to start moving in this direction by way of our long game. My daughter, Ebony Jewel, she envisioned in a tribute to Black Wall Street, let's do that again. Let's have Black Wall Street in Dallas. And so now we have what is known as West Wall Street. Our church is Friendship West. And so West Wall Street, because again, the church is still in our community, that gathering space. And so every quarter we have what we call West Wall Street, where the church becomes a mall, as it were, and Black businesses get to set up their booths. And when they set up their booths, they do it on a Sunday and Saturday. And we basically support and build up our businesses. And what is so beautiful, and I think you'll appreciate this, is that many of the businesses who are now with West Wall Street testify that their highest income occurs during the year. Their break or make point has to do with being a part of West Wall Street. And so we're trying to build a Black business community. And as we build that Black business community, we have a chance to build a community. And in that community, we're going to, of course, control education, control our economics, control our politics. Malcolm X is still right. You don't control your politics if you don't control your economics.
That finger again, the finger. There you go.
I keep messing up.
We're going to talk to the hand.
Good. You was on Malcolm X quote. Talk to the hand, but we want to see your face. Go, do the finger. You was talking about Malcolm X. That was good, Vicky.
Right.
Okay.
But that is so important that we, control our economics, but you can't do that when you have a low financial IQ individually.
Yes.
And so we're trying to build up the financial IQ of individuals and do it within the context of, okay, we got to do it, but we also have to think about the community at large.
Well, there was so many things, so many rich things in there, George, growing up there in Dallas, because you were talking about the community. When I was there, I lived in Singing Hills. So that's my stomping ground. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And we were a community back then. Now you can see the gray hair, so you know how much time has passed since I was there.
Yeah.
But I was looking the other day and I noticed that Town Center Mall, which was actually established by Yvonne Ewell, Dr. Ewell, and Mr. Cotton, and so forth, they've totally washed out that entire history. I could not believe it. The greatest, one of the greatest educational institutions that was developed by Black educators suddenly has no history around it there in Dallas, Texas. Okay, for students and people to really understand how that struggle really changed for a while, the educational makeup of the area. But anyway, the last thing I wanted to ask, at least as far on a formal basis, Dr. Haynes, was economic justice is an unfought battle. You've touched on it greatly in your comments, but your colleagues around the country who don't necessarily have the focal point of a Greg Abbott or the focal point of Trumpism being as out there, yet it still exists. And I know that you have great influence with your conventioneers and through Bishop College and through all of the things that you've done. How are you going to get them to wake up?
Talk to me. That's a good question. Right. Like, because even though we may be in New York and we have Kathy Hochul there, but in some of these pockets, it's alive and well, right? Because not everything is New York City or Syracuse or Buffalo or Rochester. You know, we got some stuff right around the corner. So what's your answer to that? That's a good question.
That's the $1 million question. And for me, I think it's education, 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 and an education out of, and I hate to put it like this, but in too many instances, my beloved colleagues have been exposed too long to white Jesus and instead of the right Jesus.
Okay.
And white Jesus is going to always insist on personal piety with no social or economic responsibility. And because of white Jesus, we end up thinking that the only thing we are to do is get people ready for heaven instead of addressing the hell that we are dealing with here on earth. And that has everything to do with what a plantation theology, one of my mentors calls it. And a plantation theology, again, we just want to have well-behaved slaves. And I can't allow Rosa Parks to stay on the back of the bus, carrying a Bible. We need to change the bus system. And so for me, that has everything to do with a theology, with a way we view scripture. I don't get how we don't get that when Jesus starts his ministry, he opens up the book and reads Isaiah and says, this is what my ministry is about. Preaching good news to the poor, setting the captives free, healing those who are broken in body, opening the eyes of the blind, proclaiming the year of Jubilee or the year of economic justice, which is what that means. That's what Jesus said his ministry was going to be about. So if that's what his ministry was about, and he was anointed by the Spirit to do that, then my question becomes, how are you going to be claiming the anointing that Jesus had and you're not doing what Jesus did and what Jesus was about? And for me, again, it goes back to education, re-educating us out of the miseducation of, what, old girl down in Georgia calls Christian nationalism, which is white Christian nationalism, which is what she is saying.
Right.
And we've got to get delivered from that. And when we get delivered from that, we won't be able to help but see that real followers of Christ are about what Christ was about. And Christ was more than just saving souls. As a matter of fact, he did more work in terms of justice, in terms of economically helping the poor than he did anything else. And if we ain't about that, we ain't about him.
Thank you.
So Doc, a couple more things. So for the Dream Summit, right, next Saturday, what do you want the people who come to your talk to walk away and do, right? Because we go to the thing, we hear the thing, we'll get pumped up. We might run in there. Listen to you, brother. I know there's gonna be some running, right? So what do you want them to run to do? Okay. They're at the summit. What do you want them to run to do? Because I'm listening to you and I'm hearing some marching orders, right? And a challenge. So what is your challenge to the participants at the Dream Summit? And then I got two more things for you before you run.
Yeah, well, and I really appreciate this question because I think we go to so many summits, conferences, and conventions, get fired up, and then we go back to reality, and it's almost as if the reality of our situation douses all the energy that we get from these summits and conferences. What excites me about this conference is the possibility, number one, of energizing us to continue to dream in the context of what has become a nightmare in this country. So I don't want us to stop dreaming. That's why I love the fact that it is a dream summit. But then number two, to leave there with a big vision that is accompanied, here it is, by a plan, by a strategy, a strategy that includes, and this for me is so important, not just what I get out of it, but what my community gets out of it, what our people get out of it. Because if it stops with me, if I become successful, if I'm, to quote Tupac Shakur, a rose out of concrete, my question is, what about the other roses that did not make it? As much as I love that poem by Tupac, because it embodies or expresses, how well we've done in this country in spite of, but somehow I want to empower us to break up the concrete. Because if I break up the concrete, then more rose bushes can blossom through, the cultivation of the kind of climate that allows us all to become what we should become. So for me, it's going to be very important that we leave there dreaming in the face of a nightmare. It's going to be crucially important that we leave strategizing and with a plan, so that we move from hallelujah to do-ya-luya. But then finally, it's going to be very important that we find ourselves dreaming in such a way that we break up the concrete, those structures, those systems that mess or preclude the whole community from experiencing what they need to. I think LeBron James said that, I came from a rough beginning. I'm working for the day when no one will have to come from or up from a rough beginning. And I think that's going to be the big challenge.
We're looking forward to you. And by
right.
the way, get to the summit early, because Dr. Haynes' talk is in the 1020 block. Okay. So
1020 block on what day, George?
On Saturday.
Okay.
On Saturday, August 27th, minddreamsummit.com. If you don't listen, this brother's giving us a preview of what is going to be a very powerful talk. Now, I have two things. First of all, this is a panel meeting. I don't know if you knew this, brother. You got 08 over there. You got 1911 over here.
First fam.
Okay.
All right.
You got 08 over there.
All right.
But Omega Psi Phi fraternity throwing up the hooks.
So, okay.
All right. And I know you a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha 06 up here.
See, what George doesn't know is that Madam Supreme is now is from Dallas, Texas. I don't know if you know that, George.
I guess I know it now.
Okay.
And the last thing, Eli wanted me to ask you this question. I'm happy to ask this question. He wants to know from you, my brother, and I'm asking you in the spirit of Stephen A. Smith as a Giants fan, but Eli wants to know, when will Dallas win the Super Bowl? It's been 20 years. He wants to know when your Dallas Cowboys will win the Super Bowl. What is your answer to that? Oh, we lost him.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I guess he won't answer that question. We chased him away. Yes. We chased him away, Vicky. All right.
You gonna stop the recording? That was